Well, welcome to this week's episode of AE Squared. Once again, as we all shelter in place and wonder when we get to have a normal life again, we're back here in my office at Hillier, and excited to bring you our third episode with, quite frankly, our ultimate customer. I'm so excited to introduce you to him. This is a fantastic gentleman. Not only is he a warfighter and a pilot, but he also has his own media platform. We're going to tell you all about that, and we're going to talk about what it's like to have his rear end in a seat that's both got a microphone in the air and a microphone in front of him interviewing other people. But first, and a good lead-in to the life of Justin Hasard Lee, here's an oldie but a goodie. Here's one of the first intros that we did for Hillier Measurements that includes the planes that he flies. Meet Tom, married, 2 kids, and delivering the respect our country deserves to those who would threaten it. At Hillier Measurements, we design and deliver test capability to ensure Tom makes it home every time. If you represent the best in engineering talent, work with us. And if you build our nation's defense, we look forward to working for you. We are Hillier Measurements. And welcome back. Well, I told you a little bit about him. Let me introduce you to him for real. Joining us via Zoom today is callsign Hazard Justin Lee, straight out of Luke in Phoenix. Justin, welcome to this virtual version of AE Squared. It's good to have you.
Jeff, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's exciting to meet you. I was so excited. I have friends and family in Phoenix, and y'all at Luke just did that flyover in Phoenix for first responders. We thank you guys at Luke for that. Just as we were going to air, a bunch of my staff were down the road to catch the Blue Angels are flying over Austin today. So it's a day for fighter pilots here in Austin, and I'm excited to have you. So I'm kind of curious, if you take it back a little bit before we jump into the nuance and fun of F-35, take us back a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you ended up in that seat, and where you grew up, and all those good details.
Yeah, sure. So I remember going to an air show when I was 5 years old and seeing the Thunderbirds fly, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. And that was back in the day when you could climb into the cockpit of an F-16. And so I got a chance to see that and put on a helmet. I was only 5, so it looked like a bobblehead.
Right.
With that, it was a P-55 helmet on my head. But I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot from then on. And so I was playing with all the toys growing up, and kind of had a table. You can't really do a lot of flying when you're that young. But when I was in high school, I got my first flight in a Cessna 152.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the most incredible experience. It was in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And the runway, it's on a cliff. So as soon as you take off, you see the canyons.
You reach altitude quick. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was almost like taking off from an aircraft carrier.
Right.
So it was an incredible experience. And I remember I worked at McDonald's to try and pay for flight lessons, which it's a losing battle if you're interested trying to do that.
Yeah.
And,
but you got your VFR ticket while you're
No, I only got, I think, about 12 hours
right.
in high school. So not too many, didn't even solo, but I knew I had the flying bug, and I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. So I applied, and I remember getting a letter in the mail, and I should have known. I was naive at the time. It was just a small white envelope. It said, unfortunately, we don't have the room for you at the academy. And I was crushed after that. But a couple weeks later, I got accepted to another school called New Mexico Military Institute. And they said if I kept my grades up, I could go to the Air Force Academy. And I held up to my end of the bargain and made it to the Air Force Academy after a year there. And went through the academy, did some glider flying there, got selected for a pilot slot to UPT. And then went to undergraduate pilot training.
Where'd you go to UPT?
Texan 2.
What's that? Where'd you go to UPT at?
Advanced Air Force Base.
Advanced. So by then, so you flew the Texans. So by then, they had transitioned away from the standard tweet to T-38 rotation.
Yeah. This was back in 2010.
2010.
So, yeah, incredible airplane. So I remember showing up to pilot training, and the wing commander came in, gave us a little bit of a pep talk, and there were 30 people in our class. And he said, all right, I want you to close your eyes. How many of you want to be fighter pilots? Raise your hand. And so I raised my hand. He's like, all right, open your eyes. And all 30 people had their hand raised.
Yeah.
And he said, good luck, and walked out.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much our pep talk.
Yeah, very few people show up going, I really want to see 141. That doesn't happen. Yeah.
So, so we started flying the T6.
Yeah.
It was an incredible airplane. It's almost 1,100 horsepower. It's almost like flying a P-51 Mustang.
Right. PT6 in the nose, right?
What's that?
It's a turboprop PT6.
Yes.
In the front?
Yeah. Yeah. Tons of power, especially compared to some of the light civilian flying that I did. And I didn't really take to school. I didn't love school, but for some reason, flying airplanes, getting graded each flight, it was almost like combining school with sports. And I had an incredible time. You start off, you fly transition, learning to fly point A to point B. Then you learn how to fly aerobatics, which was a ton of fun. Then you learn how to fly it through instruments. And then lastly, formation, which was an incredible experience, 6-month course. And at the end of that, 7 of us got selected to go fly the T-38 supersonic jet trainer, built back in the 50s.
Right.
Back then, they had really small engines. So they wanted to go supersonic, so they made the wings tiny. So very, very aerodynamic plane.
It's the old, you're landing right on the edge of a stall because of that coming in, right?
It landed about 175 miles an hour.
Yep.
So incredibly quick. So it's fast. But the low speed handling of that is not great. And that's why they have the 2 paths. In the past, all pilots went to fly the T-38.
Yep.
But so many people ended up killing themselves in that final turn, stalling, that they just had fighter guys now go to the T-38, and the rest went to like a business jet.
Yeah. It's the old Beach 400s, right? Or something like that, or?
Yeah, it's called a T1. I'm not sure exactly the make and model of it, but it's kind of like a business jet that they go and fly. So we had 3 people washed out, 20 people go fly the T1, and then 7 of us went and flew the T-38, and it mimics the same thing as before. So you're learning how to fly point A to point B. You're learning how to do aerobatics. Then they put you in the back seat with a covering over your jet, and you're flying like you're in a cloud, IFR conditions. And then formation. And at the end of that, 3 or 4 of us got selected for fighters. And I got selected for the F-16, which was my first pick. So I was extremely excited about that.
So you go to fighter lead in. Was that a Luke then? Where do you
go? Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals, the IFF. I went to Shepherd for that. And that's a 6-week course where you're learning how to employ the T-38 in a tactical environment.
Oh, okay. So you're still in a 38 for that.
Yes. Yeah, right. You're still in the T-38 because you haven't done anything tactical up to this point.
Right.
You've done some formation, but at IFF, you're learning how to do the basics of dogfighting, learning how to bomb. And it's really the last step. They're trying to see, do you have what it takes to fly in a fighter? And they end up washing out about 20% of people at IFF. And so after IFF, I went to here at Luke Air Force Base and learned to fly the F-16. It was a 9-month course. You start off, again, flying point A to point B. After that, you learn how to dogfight. Then you learn how to do long-range air-to-air, air-to-ground, suppression of enemy air defense. And then they shipped me off to Korea for my first combat squadron.
I've seen some of the photos from you in a Viper over Korea. You've had some great cockpit videos.
Yeah. You can
semi-inverted and
It was a great time out there.
So it's a great time. But let me ask you, kind of as the lead-in, in those early days going through Texan 38. Lead in, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of competition and whatnot, but that's all has purpose, right? But a lot of decision making has got to happen really fast, and especially probably in the 38, since that's still an old generation plane. Talk to me a little bit in those early days of training as far as how the Air Force teaches you and how you learn to handle stress and critical thinking simultaneously. Because right now, in the time that we're in, our population globally is in a peculiar time where they too are in the fog of war, whether it be politics, news cycle, good data, bad data, uncertainty about COVID. And every day there is a decision to make whether they even go outside. Is there an analog to your training, learning to fly planes, that would be appropriate and useful for our listeners to consider as they face their own life and uncertainty in this time of COVID?
Yeah, so that's actually what I do now. So I'm an instructor in the F-35, and we teach those new kids that are coming here how to fly the F-35. And a big factor of that is mental toughness. And for me, mental toughness goes back to, at the Air Force Academy, I used to box. And we used to have sports psychologists from the Olympic Training Center, which is also located in Colorado Springs. come over to work with us, and we would work with visualization. In pilot training, we now call that chair flying. So you can go through an entire sortie in your head, because it would be nice for us to be able to take off every single day and fly around. But unfortunately, the flights are limited. So you need to make sure that you're maximizing each one. So you can chair fly everything that you're doing, and that'll give you a leg up. Next, they work with us on staying in the present moment. So when we fly, we have thousands of decisions that we have to make every flight.
Right.
And no pilot has had a perfect flight. So when you make a mistake, it's important to leave that in the past, don't grade yourself, and move on to the next decision that has to be made. And lastly, probably mental self-talk. So you don't want to be kicking yourself for a mistake that you made in the past. That's already happened. There's nothing you can do about it. So look to the next decision that you have to make. Again, don't grade yourself. And so that kind of forms the mental toughness that we try to instill in the pilots. And a lot of it comes from previous experience. So
Right.
I highly recommend people that want to become fighter pilots to play sports growing up.
Right.
Because sports, you have to be in high pressure environments.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to lose. You have to take critiques from your coaches and find a way to get better for the next game. So there's a lot of parallels to that, because after all this training, you go through pilot training, the T6, T38, through your B course. I showed up to South Korea, and your first job will always be to be in charge of the snack bar.
Yeah, sink snacks.
You can't walk in there thinking you're tough stuff. So you're starting at the bottom again. So it's important to be humble, and then eventually you can change your leadership style.
Was that a hard transition to make for yourself, or do you see that as a challenge for people to kind of separate the personal, the emotional side of that? I've made a mistake, and not to dwell on the mistake, but to allow the emotion to just pass right on through and move on. But because I honestly, I see that I'm a tennis fan, and you can see that with professional tennis players, those who can, have a bad point and leave it and go to the next point as though it never happened. That is a huge advantage. And others just don't seem to make that jump. So for your students that you're teaching that to, is there a getting gooder at this in 3 easy steps type approach that you guys teach these new pilots?
Well, we call it the snowball effect, where one bad decision makes another mistake
Right.
happen, makes another mistake happen. And the speeds we fly, we're averaging a mile every 3 seconds of closure.
Right.
So it's easy for something to kind of spin off and the wheels to fall off. So for me, what helps is meditating. So meditating, you're kind of doing the same thing in a controlled environment. You're just sitting there, and thoughts will definitely pop in your head. I've been doing this for several years, and probably at best I can turn off about half the thoughts. So the thoughts are going to pop in. Your job is to identify those thoughts, not berate yourself, not kick yourself, and then move on. So it's kind of I think meditating helps out quite a bit as a parallel to what we do. But you can't really snap your fingers and do it. You have to really ingrain it in your life.
Right. So when you and I first started talking before leading up to today's conversation, I had just finished General Mattis's autobiography. If you get a chance, if you haven't read it, it's profoundly good, and he's a gifted writer. But in that book, over and over and over, he is going back to John Boyd and the OODA Loop concept. And if you remember, you and I talked about this, about is the OODA Loop still a concept? And you had shared that, well, yes, but now it's perception, decision, and execution, as far as the mindset of rapid decision making and whatnot. Help our listeners, help myself understand a little bit about what that looks like in application for engineering as a kind of a structured approach for fast feedback and decision making in theater, because all of us have places in our life where we're combining critical thinking and stress, and sometimes we don't do it very well. And so I'm kind of curious what you've learned in the cockpit about how you apply that we could apply outside of the cockpit.
Yeah, well, I think one good frame of reference is using it as part of the debrief. So when we go out and fly, we'll only fly for about an hour to an hour and a half. And a lot of that is an admin phase. So if we're going out to dogfight, we're burning a ton of fuel really quickly. You can burn all your gas in 5 minutes.
Right.
So these sets will typically last about 15 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll spend 2 to 6 hours debriefing those 15 to 20 minutes. And we'll go through everything that happened. Sometimes we'll be listening to the radio call, same radio call 15 times to try and figure out what went wrong. And so the framework that we look at is through perception, like you said. So we're trying to see, did the student screw up in perceiving the world? So using your eyes, using your ears, looking outside, looking in the cockpit, using your radar. Did you have all that information available to build a mental model of the world that was accurate? So that's an area where people can make quite a bit of mistakes. I think task saturation has a big thing to do with that. So we try to teach our students not to be more than 90% task saturated, because once you go over 100%, things are just dropping off without you making a smart decision. So you want to be maximizing yourself in your jet. So keep it pretty high, 90%, but start dropping off tasks smartly, because there's always more stuff to do than you're capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
Next, make a correct decision. So in the F-35, we have thousands of different tactics that we can execute based on what we're seeing. They're almost like plays in a NFL playbook.
Right.
And so oftentimes a student can pick the incorrect play. And so that has to do with studying and being able to memorize all those plays. It also has to do with being able to think on your feet. So a lot of times we have students that are really book smart, but when they get in the air with those fast closure rates, they have some issues. So we'll have different techniques for working on making smart, quick decisions through that. And the last area would be in execution. So you perceive the world correctly, you have decided on the right tactic, but then you just executed the tactic incorrectly. And that would be like a quarterback going out there and choosing the right receiver, but then overthrowing the receiver.
Right.
And that typically has to do with switchology, so pushing all the buttons in the correct sequence. And so we'll go over exactly how you push the buttons and do all this stuff to execute that tactic correctly. So I think two things, using that framework, but more importantly than that, actually debriefing what you did. If you have a project, a lot of people like to just leave that in the past, leave that helmet fire out there and move on to the next project. But I think adopting that framework of spending 3 or 4 times the amount that the project took, actually debriefing to see what you can do better for the next time.
I don't know if you saw an earlier episode that we did with Daniel Robinson, a Red 6 F-22 driver, and doing augmented reality. But as you're talking about that first part, the perception and having an accurate picture of a view of the world, Daniel talked a lot about being able to apply real world stress of the fog of war. It's one thing to see an enemy on your radar. It's another thing to look up and see it, right? And the effects. How would you? I would assume, even though the F-35 is advanced and provides so much rich and true data to the pilot, there's still the fog of war, right? The first place for failure is to have the false perception of the world around you. How do you? Can you in training presently today overload them or put out those Trojan horse falsehoods to teach them what bad data looks like versus news, so that it's more instinctual and less intellectual? Because there's, like you're saying later on, they're book smart. There's not a lot of time to rationally think through a lot of things. So how do you hone that perception of an accurate perception of the world around you? Is it just repetitive flights and sorties?
I think the students get that just flying in general. We call it airmanship. So when things don't go perfectly their way, they have to be able to make a smart audible. And that's what we're building out here. We're building mission commanders and functional team leads. So when we go to an exercise like Red Flag, so Red Flag was started back in Vietnam. Its job was to get pilots those first 10 combat missions in a controlled environment, which the studies showed if they got those first 10 missions, they had a much higher chance of survival. So we'll go there and we'll be in charge of 75, 80 aircraft. And so your job is to be in charge of all those aircraft and to be a good leader out there. So that's one of the ways that we ensure that we build that leadership with the students.
So I'm curious, the things that the questions you've never been asked, but you kind of perhaps sit there and go, if they only knew. put us in your head in the cockpit, whether it's 16 or 35. Is there anything that someone who isn't familiar with your working lifestyle would be surprised to know is a challenge or something that surprised you as you found yourself spending a considerable amount of time at altitude, that you perhaps were ill prepared for, or you were surprised to have to learn or think your way through in your career in the cockpit? Anything come to mind?
I would say the one, at least going through pilot training, the one thing I could have done better is learning to fly instruments.
Right.
So beforehand. So I had gotten my private pilot's license, and that allowed me to have a few steps ahead of some of the other pilots when I got to pilot training in terms of learning how to fly point A to point B, learning how to fly aerobatics. But I, in retrospect, should have spent more time learning instruments, because it's the fire hose effect. You're with a bunch of people that have wanted to fly since they were 5 years old. And so if you fall a little bit behind, then it's easy for that to snowball and for you to end up washing out or doing poorly. So I could have learned to fly instruments beforehand, which is very similar to the civilian world in terms of how we fly instruments. That's the one aspect that I could have done better going through. And I gave that advice to my brother, who's 5 years younger. He's now a Super Hornet pilot out in Japan.
No kidding.
So I guess he followed that advice a little bit better than I did.
So am I hearing you correctly that if I had an SR-22 and I went to a Part 141 school and took civilian instrument training, and wouldn't this be wonderful if I got to throw on bags and fly with you? If I was after going through a civilian instrument training course, there typically wouldn't be too many bad habits I'd need to relearn going through instrument training in the military as well. It's pretty much
it's very similar. Very similar. So very structured, and it's also about kind of unlearning some of the things that you learn, like the seat of your pants flying. That works really well when you're flying in VFR conditions, visual conditions. But when you're in a cloud, you need to ignore those sensations and just focus on your instruments. So that can be very challenging for pilots. We have some pilots that are just real good stick and rudder pilots, but then it's difficult for them to turn that part of their brain off and now focus just on the instrument. So I recommend, if anybody has a passion for aviation, to go in and fly a light civilian plane like a Cessna, or even better, a Cirrus. Because for me, when I soloed that first time, it really changed my perspective on life, and it was incredible. And it's only about 15 hours to solo a plane, so I would highly recommend that.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So let's go back and let's discuss your time in the 16 and then the 35. I'm kind of curious. A lot of our viewers support you as a warfighter and your colleagues, and we're proud to do so. And I kind of want to get a little bit in your head and understand this, so that we can understand how to better support you. When you're flying 16s, which there's still 2,500 of them flying in the world today, and they're still in production. As a pilot, what did risk mitigation look like to you as you approached a sortie flying that vehicle? What did risk mitigation look like to you flying the 35? And for those of us who support you in the design, development, test, and maintenance of the electronics and the craft, help us understand how we can understand you better in terms of how we should innovate in the future, so that we can help you mitigate less, if you know what I mean. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah. Right? So as a fighter pilot, one misconception that I think a lot of people have is we just hop in the jet and go, but there's a ton of mission planning that goes into these missions. Right. And so that's where the risk mitigation starts. And so the framework we look at mission planning is starting with the ends. So what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve out there? Right. Then you have the ways. What are the tactics that you're going to do to make that happen? Then you have the means. What are the assets that you have available at your disposal? Mm-hmm. And then lastly, what is the risk? So we call that the ALR, the acceptable level of risk. And so they're all different variations of what amount of risk you're willing to take. And oftentimes that'll be the combatant commander, a general, letting us know what is the risk that he or she is willing to take. We have everything from everything has a little bit of risk. So what we're doing in a peacetime training environment at Luke is going to be different than what we're doing in a
Actual
low end conflict like Afghanistan, medium end conflict like the Gulf War, high end conflict like World War II, all the way to extreme. So the Doolittle raid would be a good example of an extreme ALR extreme mission.
You're not coming home.
You're expecting to lose a lot of people out there, and there are times when that's worth it. So that's going to be set at a very high level, and then our job as aviators is to develop a plan around that risk. So that's one aspect of risk, and another aspect is what is the chance of this mission failing. So a good example of that would be Task Force Normandy. So Task Force Normandy was the first initial strikes during the Gulf War, and I think a lot of people would be surprised that the first strikes carried out were by Apaches. And so their job was to go out and take out some early warning radar sites so that the initial strike waves could go in undetected into Iraq. So that would be a mission that would be the level of risk tolerance was very low for that mission failing because we needed those early warning radar sites taken out so that the strike wave wouldn't be so Saddam wouldn't be alerted to the strike train going into country. So that's a little bit of how we look at risk. And then when we're actually flying, so when I was in Afghanistan, it's about being detached and using your logical brain. So it's easy to get sucked into the moment and use that limbic system and start to feel the adrenaline flowing, the fight or flight. But your job as an aviator, especially as a fighter pilot, you're a little bit detached from the situation. You're probably 15,000 feet up. So you're not going to be, we did a lot of close air support out there.
Right.
So it's a lot more understandable that the guys and girls on the ground taking fire, it's a little bit easier for them to get sucked in the moment, which is why it's important for you to take a step back, take a breath, and be able to make a rational decision out there.
Yeah. So it probably, listening to you speak, it sounds like some of the A-10 drivers are probably, that's probably more of an intense mental discipline getting closer to theater in some respects. I hear about them being, hearing on the radio and whatnot, the panic or the intensity of the theater that from, if you're on a bombing mission, is a little bit taken away. What about from the complexity of the plane perspective? We when we talked to Box, astronaut Greg Johnson, he's talking about flying the most complex machine in the world with over 2 million parts, and at some point there's just you have to mitigate what you can and leave the rest out of your head when you head to the plane. I know when I started taking flight lessons, the flight started as before your flight, but as you walk out staring at the plane. But can you talk a little bit about how you personally would mitigate risk, or you depend on your team from a maintenance and operations standpoint? Because 16 and a 35 is still a vastly complicated machine going really, really fast. You can have a bad day real quick. So from a pilot's perspective, what do you depend on, and what do you just have to trust so that you can get in to fly a mission with confidence and that sense of serenity?
Yeah, there's only so much you can control. So just focus on what you can control. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting brain bites, as we call it, on unnecessary stuff. So flying fighters can be a dangerous profession. One of the things that has killed a lot of pilots in the past are G-induced loss of consciousness. So when we fly, right now I'm at 1G, I weigh about 200 pounds. With my gear on about 230. If you've been on a roller coaster, kind of push your head down, that's about 3.5 Gs. We'll pull 9 Gs. Right. And so at that rate, I weigh over 2,000 pounds. Right. And the blood is being pulled from your head into your extremities. And unfortunately, from 2000 to 2014, we had 17 pilots that died from a G-induced loss of consciousness. Right. And so when we go up, show up to work, we will do what's called an ORM, operational risk mitigation sheet. And so that goes over how well we slept the night before, how we ate, how hydrated we are. So if you're just 3% dehydrated, that reduces your G tolerance time by 50%.
No kidding. Time.
So it's
the time you can be under a G load.
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll be pulling G's for sustained amounts of time. So
Right.
so it's important to stay hydrated to be able to maintain that G tolerance time
Right.
when you're flying. So G tolerance, working out. So we try to do a lot in terms of working out, especially the legs, to be able to push that blood up. Do a
Right.
good, we call it a AGSM, anti-G straining maneuver. Um, so yeah, it starts with yourself, and then it kind of works out, and then you have what's going on with that mission. Is it a complex mission? Do you have multiple aircraft? Do you have different aircraft from different bases showing up? All these things add wrinkles, and it's a layering effect. What's the weather like? If it's socked in from surface up to 50,000 feet, now we're going to be flying in IFR conditions and doing all of our tactics, going upside down, doing all kinds of stuff, which can increase the risk quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, we look at the overall risk, and we have different levels for accepting that risk based on how important the mission is. If it's a troops in contact situation in Afghanistan and they're looking, they might be overrun, then we're going to accept a high level of risk. If, on the other hand, we're doing a training mission out here, it's a new student who's doing his or her first flight, then maybe we'll call knock it off and just do the mission on a different day when the pilot slept better, when the weather conditions are better as well. And so yeah, we'll have different levels, and each of those levels will correspond to a different leadership level that's willing to buy that risk.
Yeah. So earlier we were talking about like pilot workload. You're talking about this 90% reduction and whatnot. I've been in F-35 cockpit, and it's unlike any aircraft. If you've never looked at a variety of fighter aircraft, the 35 stands alone in terms of its apparent simplicity. Let's put it that way. Do you find that managing pilot workload is in the end, though, any less of a challenge in 35 than it was in Flying 16 or other aircraft? Or is it just different?
It's easier, much easier, but you're still operating at that 90% level.
Right.
I think one thing unique about aircraft is we can have almost a strategic level impact on the fight, especially in like something like an F-35. You can have a big effect on a fight. That's part of the reason why they cost so much.
Right.
So yeah, you always want to be maximizing yourself and the jet, but that just means you can do more things. You can bring your decision level up to more of that tactical package command level and make those smart audibles with what's going on.
Right.
So it is a lot easier to fly, but we just expect more out of the pilots.
Being an instructor, and so you're taking students coming in then that are coming straight from 38s or most of them, this is their second on command. Do you get many guys coming right out of UBT, or are most of those guys like you had flown 16s or something else and then come to 35?
Most of the people are experienced fighter pilots, but in 2018 we started the pipeline straight from UPT as well.
So 2018. So do you expect there to be a step change effect as far as how fast your students will matriculate into their confidence in the 35 once the TX is flying? A big part of the TX development to replace T-38 is to have a fifth generation cockpit in the trainer. Was that a hard transition for you? I mean, or was it really, coming from 16 to 35, it's just generally speaking, it was just a different way to get to the same functionality, but it was generally just easier. Or
it was similar. It's similar. The F-35 is built in large part the switchology similar to an F-16.
Right.
So it came pretty naturally, and yeah, it's a lot more modern, as you said. The cockpit is unlike anything else. I basically have two big iPads in front of me, and it's touch screen. There's only about, I think, 20 buttons in the cockpit itself, as opposed to the Viper had hundreds of little switches and buttons. So it's a completely different experience. And that's one of the things that makes it fifth gen. So fifth generation fighter is the sensor fusion and what data is available to the pilot. So in F-16, to throw more stats, we had 6 times the CFIT, controlled flight into terrain, of other fighters in the F-16. So that's where a pilot is just flying along. working the radar and runs in a mountain and kills himself.
Right.
So in the F-16, we had layer technology, 70s, 80s, 2000s technology, and each thing was tied to a different screen.
And you never had TAWs in 16?
What's that?
Terrain avoidance. Did you have or
we
ground
eventually
procs or
got
anything?
that. Yeah, the AGCAS, auto ground collision avoidance system. We got that in 2014, and that's already saved about 10 lives.
Right.
So that was a huge thing. But the root cause of that is the pilot workload.
Right.
Because all of those different sensors and things that you have is tied to a different screen. For instance, your radar warning receiver is not
sensor
tied
fusion
to radar.
To display it all in one.
Yeah. Right. Your brain is the sensor fusion. So in that 16, you're looking all over the place, combining all this, and then pilot
you're the processor
prioritizes. Yeah. And ends up hitting a mountain. So in the F-35 though, that's automated quite a bit. And it's a red dot if it's a bad guy, green dot if it's a good guy. So from a pilot perspective, it's incredible and it's awesome. And yeah, it's true sensor fusion. And we also have augmented reality.
I was just going to bring that up. I wanted to ask you about that because the helmet in the F-35 is what mere civilians like me really never get to experience or see. I'd love to hear you. What does that make available to you that you didn't have in the 16?
It's incredible. The helmet, it's true augmented reality. So in the F-35, we do not have a heads-up display. It's all the data is pumped into the helmet.
Right.
And so it'll put different symbols over different things. So when I look out, I look at my wingman, there's a circle over all the good guys with a number of who they are in the formation. When I look forward, I'll see triangles over all the bad guys with all the data that I need about them. It's almost like if you're driving in your car and you want to see all the restaurants, you hit a button and then there's like a circle over all the restaurants and you're like, oh no, I want Indian food. And it just puts
so what you're saying is it's the Yelp for red air is what you're saying, right?
Yes. It's incredible. I think you're going to get a chance to see it pretty soon. I think Apple is working on something similar.
Oh, fantastic.
And I think it's going to be a complete game changer.
What about, is it more of a novelty or is it of real functional use, this concept of being able to look through the aircraft between your legs with the 35?
So we'll use that at night. So that's
at night. Okay.
It's almost like being in a 90s video game. So it's definitely not like your eyes, but at night it's great, especially.
So it's basically you're seeing an IR synthetic aperture radar view is what you're saying. Kind of thing. Got it.
Yep. And it works in NOAA Loom. So whereas NVG's night vision goggles, that amplifies the moonlight.
Yep.
It'll work in total darkness. So we have both. We have a night vision camera, and then we can switch to the DAS, the distributed aperture system as well.
Right.
But yeah, it's pretty cool to see at night. In fact, we're gearing up for a night week next week. So we were testing out all the cameras.
Is that just a completely different mission for you personally? I mean, doing night versus day mission, or I mean, putting the aircraft on the ground, getting it in the air and flying the mission. Is that a radically different experience or preparation that you need to go through still?
It takes a little bit of time to get in the swing of things, but in Afghanistan, I spent about
most of your sorties.
Most of the sorties at night. There's a 2 or 3 month stretch where I didn't even see the day in the winter.
Yeah.
So you can get very proficient, and we can do all of our tactics at night, which is something a lot of air forces don't do. The risk goes up at night, but as long as you are proficient, you can do almost everything you do during the day at night.
Yeah. So let me ask you the question for the 18-year-old, and then I want to ask you the question about the next chapter in your life. So speaking to the 18-year-old who is hearing this and is choosing the path you've made as the heroic path that he wants to follow. I was there as an 18-year-old. What would you tell that 18-year-old to be doing today, whether he goes the academy or ROTC or whatnot? What would you tell him today to to weigh the odds in his favor that he could find himself similarly as you sitting in a 35? What should he be doing now?
I'd say the first thing is to get good grades. So that's ultimately why I didn't get into the academy right away and had to go to New Mexico Military Institute for a year. So do better than I did and get better grades so you don't have to waste a year of your life there. So 1, get good grades. 2, do a good job on your SAT. there are a bunch of other people in purgatory with me at NIMI who didn't have a high enough SAT score. So they just threw us all into an SAT prep course, and we all got better SAT scores after a couple weeks of this program. So I'd recommend doing that so you don't have to waste a year of your life. 3, play a sport.
Right.
Like we talked to before, it builds thick skin. If you don't like sports, you still want to be physically fit because these jets are very physically demanding, but do something where there's something on the line. So whether it's debate, whether it's chess, something competitive where you have to get better each game. And then lastly, I would say fly a little bit.
I was going to say,
that's if that's what you really want to do, go ahead and fly a little bit, see if you like it. Some people find they don't like it. Some people find they get airsick. Usually those people can get over being airsick. See if you have the propensity to do it. So it only takes about 15 hours to fly. I know as a high school student, that can be kind of pricey with even a Cessna costing like $150 an hour, but you can do the like Civil Air Patrol, and they do a good job of getting kids up in the air to see if that's their passion. So those would be some of the things that I would recommend.
Good counsel. So now the question from today, looking forward. One of the things that I find really fascinating about you is you have your own podcast, and it's a dang good one, Professionals Playbook. That's actually how I found you. Is listening to your podcast. Tell me the story about how a guy who flies jets for a living decides, you know what, I need to have a podcast. How'd that happen?
It's definitely a non-standard path. So when I came back from Afghanistan, the town of Carefree, just north of Phoenix, they wanted a speaker for Memorial Day who had been to combat. And so I gave the speech, and there's a woman in the crowd named Barbara Hatch who worked for the Veterans Heritage Project, who reached out to me and said, love the speech. Can you come to some of our schools? Because they basically have veterans go and talk with students and talk about the military and kind of bridge that disconnect. And so I was doing that for a while and thought that a podcast would be a good way to do it on a larger scale.
Yeah.
And so I initially started talking about what you need to do to become a fighter pilot, and found out there are a lot of lessons learned that people have that are kind of tied into different institutions, whether you're a lawyer, doctor, scientist, or fighter pilot. We keep a lot of the things close, not because it's secret or anything like that, just because everybody's busy. So I thought I could go out to these other career fields. So I've had on other astronauts like Terry Virts, the International Space Station commander. I had on Brick Caldwell, amazing guy who's right now flies the Thunderbird #1 jet. So he's a squadron commander out there. He's kind of legendary in our community because he received the Distinguished Flying Cross for flying in Afghanistan. He was also part of the Viper test. So he was one of the guys that kept the F-16 modern, which it's an incredible testament to them that they've been able to keep the F-16 relevant for 40 plus years. So he did that. And then now he's flying for the Thunderbirds. Chris Voss, who's the FBI negotiator, was on talking about some of his secrets to negotiation. So yeah, it's been an awesome project. A lot of times felt like I was pushing the boulder 10 feet up and it would roll 5 feet back, but I have a pretty good flow on it now. And I was actually just recording a podcast the other day that's coming out soon.
So can you give us a little teaser about who's coming up next on your show? We're going to, for everyone watching this episode, we're going to put links to Justin's podcast below if you're on YouTube, or we'll attach this as well to our podcast channel. Highly encourage you check him out. Subscribe. You got to check his show out. But who's anyone coming up that we've got to make sure that we hear?
Well, I'm interested in talking to Richard Browning. So he's coming on the podcast pretty soon. He started Gravity jet suits.
Oh,
so yeah. So it's been making the rounds on YouTube of all these people in jet suits flying around, and it looks pretty incredible. So yeah, he's coming on the podcast to talk about how he started that and where that came about, and some of the lessons that he learned that he can pass on to the audience.
He's got to have a heck of a workout routine, because I see those guys with those 2 jets in both hands, and I'm just imagining their upper body strength is fairly intense. So
I think they're starting a racing league as well. So it
nuts.
Might be the next great sport.
So what's the next great career path for you? Because at some point, the younger guys are flying jets and it's time to move on. I've always been interested to know, how do you fill that competitive adrenaline void that you get paid to do today in the next chapter? What does the next chapter look like for you?
Well, I'm going to be transitioning to the reserves in a couple months out here. So I'll be
really?
doing the same job, just swapping patches. For an Air Force fighter pilot, usually the total career is about 20 years.
Right.
The first 10 years, you spend a lot of time flying. And then those last 10 years, you start to do more staff jobs, office jobs, things like that, and you fly less.
Right.
But by transitioning to the reserves, I'll be able to stay out here at Luke and fly for the next 20 years if my body can hold up.
Fantastic.
So hopefully I can stay out here. Hopefully I can keep my body functioning. We have physical therapists that work with us after every flight, since it's a lot of stress on your neck and back. So hopefully I can keep flying the F-35 for the next 20 years or so. I'll be doing it part-time, so about half the month. And then the other half, I think I'm going to do the podcast thing, maybe go on some more speaking tours and things like that when the coronavirus
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. Well, I hopefully when the coronavirus thing does come up, I can still take you up on the offer to fly out here, because it would be an absolute blessing for our staff to get a chance to meet you, because sincerely, the folks here at Hillier and our clients, I know our clients would like to come as well. We take a lot of pride in making sure that you have a long and safe career. So I personally, I just want to, first of all, thank you for your service to our country. I know that is almost a cliche these days, but I've been around folks like you my entire career, and I don't think we quite respect the sacrifice, but also the focus and professionalism you guys all bring. So it's an honor to serve you guys, and just want to make sure that publicly communicate that, and get you out here and eat some good barbecue soon when we can travel again. So,
I would love to do that. And I want to thank you and your team for building an awesome jet. So as we were talking about a little bit before, the F-35 had some negative press, but I think that's due to the jet growing up in the social media age.
Yeah.
And we've worked out a lot of the bugs. It's kind of that technological S-curve. Anytime a new technology comes out, there's going to be a lot of bugs. And we did concurrency. So we're just pumping out the jets as opposed to a traditional model of building like a fleet of 10 test aircraft and working out all the bugs. So I think the jury's still out on how effective that was. But in 2018, it was that start of that inflection point, and we worked out all the bugs. We got the 3F software.
Yep.
Overnight, the Gs, we could pull a lot more Gs. The sensors were better. It unlocked the gun. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like a video game. So 2018 was that inflection point, and I think the jet's going to get much, much better in the next 5 to 10 years. There's really no jet I'd want to go into combat in other than F-35 right now, and I think this jet is going to be a monster in the next 5 to 10 years, since there's still so much that we can improve. Whereas in a lot of the fourth-gen fighters, we've been improving them for 40 years. There's only so much you can do.
You know, it's funny. It's almost another cliche is you always complain about how much doctors make right up until the time that you have a heart attack. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you have a heart attack, you're sure glad that there's that doctor there. Mm-hmm. And that F-35 is one of the best doctors in the hospital, without a doubt.
It's like going from driving an old Corvette to a brand new Tesla.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, the best thing about the F-35 is it's hopefully good enough that we don't have to use it, because it garners enough respect from those who would otherwise challenge us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's definitely important, and that's part of the reason why we are bringing other nations into it.
Yeah,
so that there's a lot more F-35s, so that there's a lot more incentive to build upgrades.
Well, I'll tell you, even things are crazy with COVID and whatnot, but I can tell you, speaking for our little piece of the F-35 supply chain, we are hard at work to make sure that we're doing everything we can to not just maintain, but to accelerate the velocity to support Lockheed and the entire supply chain to make sure you guys have got ample opportunity to fly. I sure wish it was back I remember, you know, you're talking about getting to sit in the F-16. I remember back in the days when it was not uncommon to get F-16 incentive rides. Man, I wish we could do that in 35s. I'm very jealous of you guys.
I had just
I
as
am
good
jealous.
a time.
Yeah.
I had just as good a time. I probably gave 12 people, a dozen
yeah.
people incentive rides. And it was awesome to be able to do, especially to the crew chiefs who work on the jet for almost a decade usually before they get a ride. So it was incredible to experience to be able to fly around with your crew chief.
Well, let me tell you, as soon as COVID is over, I'm heading to California. We're shooting. Actually, we're talking about the camera angles and whatnot. I'm holding Daniel Robinson to it to go fly in his Berkut so that we can get some cockpit, some behind the lens video. Lord willing, I don't throw up. But of what they're doing at Red 6. So if the policies ever change and there is reason and intent for incentive rides in F-35, make sure I'm on that list, would you?
I'll work on that. We have about 75 F-16s out here. So we're transitioning, making the slow transition. So plenty of F-16s. We just need to get your name on the list.
When I was younger, a 16 was the goal. We'll have to talk about another time about getting close to UPT in my life too, but that glass cockpit of a Viper is a beautiful thing. And the next
Daniel and Bon Robinson promised me the next flight. So
is that what it is? Okay, well, I had him on my show first. You get him on it second, and that's the way it'll work. So next time we'll have to talk about that, unlocking the gun part of an F-35. Mm-hmm. I find it amazing that as advanced as that is, it's still good to be able to put lead in the sky in close combat.
Yeah, in Afghanistan, I used the gun several times.
Did you really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 3 times.
Air to air or air to ground?
Air to ground.
Air to ground, yeah, obviously.
Yeah, it's good for when you drop all your weapons, it's a good last resort. It's also a good suppression weapon. So we're still using the gun.
We'll save that one for next time. For next time. Justin, absolute honor to have you on our show. You make us look good, and I thank you for that. And we'll spend the rest of our career trying to make sure we make you look good. So thank you for everyone listening this week. Make sure you check out Justin's podcast. Like I said, we'll put it down below. And catch us next time. I got to be honest with you. We've shot 3 shows this week. We're making it up as we go here in the time of COVID. But you can be guaranteed we're going to bring talent almost as good as Justin next time right here on AE Squared. We'll see you then. AE Squared is a Hillier Measurements Town Hall production. Copyright 2020. AE Squared is produced by Anthony Longoria. Production support by Christian Zamora. The email address, if you'd like to attend a future taping, is tickets@hillermej.com.